Well, there's definitely a heck of a story behind all of this. So,
Okay, all right. Well, you can start wherever you want. If you want to tell me a little bit about how you came to Myth 3 and maybe how it all went or whatever. And then I have
well,
some questions too I can ask.
all right, all right. Well, I think probably in answering some of your questions, I'm gonna probably be getting to some of the larger story. But um, let's my gosh, how Myth 3 actually came about is a lot of like luck and a lot of just like kind of like strange happenings, right? Like just it really shouldn't have ever been made, but it did. It kind of came about because um, well, let me just start from the beginning to make life easier.
Sure.
So when Myth 1 was in development by Bungie, they were actually looking for another company to potentially do like an add-on for Myth. A lot of people don't know this because this add-on was eventually canceled. But one of the companies that they were interested in, doing this, kind of like Myth 1 expansion pack was this little company called Logicware. And I happened to be the creative director of Logicware. So Myth 1, again, was just on the cusp of being released. And, they had some demos out there and such like that. And it was, very... I mean, it was a fantastic little tactical game. I was able to play it, an almost final version of it. But I kind of, I didn't understand how deep they were going with their lore and their characters and how different it was. So this was 100% a problem with me because I was looking at like the gameplay with like the dwarves and the quote unquote elven archers and all that stuff, and I'm just like, oh, it's a typical fantasy type world. And so the expansion that I kind of wrote from it, I think it was like another like 10 to 12 levels, had like one or two new units and such in it. And it was just a story that kind of built on the current story, but not very well because, again, I didn't quite understand, that they were really taking this, the fantasy genre and kind of like taking it in a very different direction, kind of in a way taking it to its very kind of like ancestral roots. So instead of it being more like a kind of like a D&D type knockoff, which I really thought it was, initially, it was, far more deep and meaningful, kind of taking a lot of, these concepts straight from, like a more ancient text, like the Tuatha De Danann, the Tain Bo Clange, I think it's called, a lot of like, Irish, Scottish, Pictish myths and things like that. A lot of concepts that I wouldn't say were lost, but like were a little bit less known. And just this whole like sweeping narrative that they had of like this constant the leveler coming by every 1,000 years to destroy the world, and then in the next phase there's the hero that steps up and defeats the leveler only to become the leveler in the next age. I mean that's some cool shit, man.
Sure.
And all of that stuff was lost to me. I didn't really understand it at that point where I was writing this expansion to Myth 1. So Logicware started working on the game, on the expansion, and we were learning the engine, and I was getting deep into it, and learning like some of the tactics and stuff of the characters and how to build some interesting maps and such for it. And we actually got a chance to fly over to Bungie when they were in Chicago, and wow, that was cold. And we went over to their place. They treated us to some pizza, and we talked about what we were planning on doing with the expansion. And honestly, at the end of the day, they weren't all that happy with it, mostly because they again had a very strong vision for what their game was going to be. And honestly, I didn't quite understand it at the time. So long story short, the expansion eventually got canceled altogether. All right. So, Logicware, we just continued on. Bungie continued on. They put out Myth 1. They put out Myth 2 very quickly thereafter. And then a company called Gathering of Developers actually purchased not Bungie, but the Myth IP from Bungie. So they had that. And this was years afterwards, I believe. And then I had heard that Gathering Developers was looking for a development company to basically do a Myth 3, and they wanted submissions of like stories and concepts and things like that. Like, what would we actually do with a Myth 3 game and such like that, right? And since I was very, very familiar with Myth now, that I had a chance to actually play the final Myth 1 game and then Myth 2 and actually became a fan myself, I was like, well, let me tell you what I would do. And so I did this like huge, I think it was like 130 pages or something like that, write-up of just like story and such like that of okay, what we need to do is we need to make this prequel, and we need to talk about like all the things that led up to Myth 1 and Myth 2, right? Like actually go into who was the character that would become Balor, right? That Connacht character that was the hero that defeated the Leveler, and what about Soulblighter? Who was he? And like this like company of heroes that was Myrddred and Ravana and all this stuff. It's like, oh, wouldn't that be cool if we could tell that story? So I wrote up this huge thing, sent it to Gathering Developers. And surprisingly, they came back and said, wow, we really like this. This sounds like a really neat, concept for a game, and we totally want you guys to do it. And we were just like, oh my gosh, hell yeah. Finally, we have a fairly large project. We're working on, potentially a Myth, game, which, we're all fans of. And we're like, yeah, this is going to be great. But there was a problem. The problem was that Logicware, we had done a lot of ports and things like that. We were able to create Doom, the original Doom, and get that to run on the 3DO, if you remember that thing. But very, very technical work there. But again, it wasn't an original IP. Also, we worked on, another 3DO game called Killing Time, making an original PC port of that. It wasn't even a port. It was actually a whole new game. But again, that wasn't really considered to be a new game in the eyes of Gathering of Developers. So we were kind of told that, hey, we really think you guys, creatively have got the ability to make Myth 3, but we don't know that you have the financial, well, not the financial, but more of the like production prowess, right? Like making sure that you can hit your dates and your milestone and actually work on a original IP. So we were a little sad, but apparently what we did not know at the time was that there was another small company, a small group of people that were, in touch with Gathering Developers, and overheard, kind of like the dilemma that, hey, we want Logicware to make Myth 3, but they may not have the production chops to do it. And so they were like, hey, you know what we could do? They got in contact with us, and they said, you know what we should do? We should basically just, take your team and create a whole new company called Mumbo Jumbo. And the two guys that proposed this were a guy by the name of Ron DeMont and Mark Dockerman, and they had come from a small company called Raven Software. I think that was it. And they were like, okay, well, we just left that company. We want to form our own company. And, since this is a project that we could use, and I think they had just formed another company called Ritual Games. Oh man, I might be getting all this wrong. I'm doing all this from memory right now.
Yeah.
But this was back in 2000, just so you know. So anyway, they came to us and they said, "Hey, we can provide the management structure. You guys provide, the team and all the, the design and everything else, and we'll make this happen." And so we said, "Well, if that's going to get us this contract, hey, you know what? Let's do it." So one of the first things we did is we moved Logicware from good old downtown Covina to Irvine. And one of the things that Ron and Mark wanted to do was change the name. And it took us a while to settle on a name. And they proposed Mumbo Jumbo because it was kind of like, like a ritual. And since I think that was the company they came from, then so it was just kind of like a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing. The rest of the team didn't really love it, to be honest. But, hey, it's a thing. So we became Mumbo Jumbo Games. And so looking at our team, we had a very small team at the time. We had myself, who had, again, this, enormous design, this, vast design, and I had already broken out, like, what I want the different levels to be like, all the plot for everything, all the story, all the characters and all that stuff. I had this giant tome of stuff that I really wanted to do. And so my sights were set to, absolute AAA, title with AAA budget and everything else. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But the rest of our team, we had, two other engineers. We had Joe Rydell, who was, kind of a junior engineer, but man, he was really, really willing to learn. And then we had another engineer named Andrew Meggs, and that dude was magic. He was, I don't know. I mean, to call him like antisocial is kind of an understatement. But but that dude, man, he had the mind for not just making games, but just like super high tech, cutting edge stuff, right? And again, magic, that guy. So he was the guy that made it possible to actually take the sprite-based Myth 1 and 2 and actually say, you know what, I think we could do this in 3D with 3D animated characters and all that stuff. And, again, this was 2000, right? This hadn't been really done before. Like most of the other massive combat games and things out there were still all sprite-based, but we were like coming out of the gates going, yeah, we're going to be full 3D, with lighting and, texture mapped everything. And, it's all right. That's crazy. And remember, this was before Doom 3, which really changed a lot of concepts of like shaders and lighting models and things like that. Right. So this was, pretty early on. Anyway, we also had a guy by the name of Devin Winters, who was doing a lot of art and textures and such like that. And we had a producer, Mike Donges, who that dude was again, he was awesome, but he was still fairly new. Just came from Apple, and came to work with us just for Myth 3. We also had Bill Heineman as another engineer, and let's see, Chris. Oh man, it's gonna kill myself. I can't remember his last name. Oh my God, Chris. Oh, I can't remember his last name. Anyway, as another engineer. Although both Bill and Chris were kind of like off on the side doing other work on other projects, mainly for a company called MacPlay. Long story there, but. That was pretty much the team at the time, very, very small, development team. So one of the first things that happened, we got the budget from a gathering of developers, and we kind of looked at it and we're like, oh, wow, that's awfully, awfully tight. And doing the math and everything, we figured that the only way we could really make the entire game work is if we completed it in about a year. So, I'm looking at this like vast design that I have, constructed, and I'm like, oh my God, we have to do what in a year? This whole thing in a year? And, of course, me being a designer, I'm loath to cut down on things, but I already start, getting out the red marker, and I'm like, okay, we can't do that. We can't do that. All right, we're gonna have to, cut the corners on this. We can't do these things. And I'm still like, well, I really want to tell this story, but the problem is that the budget is so tight. We're not going to be able to do the cinematics that I wanted. We're not going to be able to do a lot of the like the interstitial, art and things like that. But I'm like, God damn it, how am I going to tell this story? So I was busy doing that. But we had bigger problems than just the actual design. We had to hire a whole team of level designers and things like that could actually build this game within a year. And on top of that, we needed to make all of this, 3D art and all these animated characters and all this stuff. And we're just like, oh my gosh, and we have to do it like now. So one of the things we did is we actually reached out to the Myth community, all of the mod makers and such like that, and we found 3 of basically the best mod people that we knew of. There was Iggy Popped, whose name was Richard Cowgill, and let's see, Fizj, Fisj, whose name was Paul Callender, and Santa's Head, and we just called him Santa, really, but we basically, flew the 3 of those, out to Irvine and did quick interviews and decided that, what, not only did these guys want to be a part of the games industry, but they were all very cool people. So we basically hired them on the spot and said, all right, we love you guys. So they were, kind of like our first hires. And since they were already familiar with the, Myth 1 and 2 engine and all the characters and everything else, we were basically building kind of like a 3D engine on top of the existing sprite engine. So all of the way the characters worked, all of the stats, all the combat systems, all that stuff, all of that still worked in the background. So the idea was that we would get them to basically build all of these levels and such like that we were trying to do in Myth 2. And then eventually we would flip a switch and it would all start working in our new engine, for Myth 3 with all the 3D characters. So that was our plan. And, they started, taking the individual levels and stuff that I had, planned for this giant epic and, started building them out and, of course, making them fun and such like that. And, okay, so they were going and doing their thing, but we also needed to hire some artists. And so, we happened to find a couple of just really amazing artists that could kind of like jump in and start doing things. One of the guys we were lucky enough to find was a guy by the name of Jay Kuteropoulos, and it was so funny. He came in, he had like, short hair that was, dyed blue, black fingernails and everything. And he came in and just nailed the interview, totally, personable dude, knew what he was talking about and was just like, I got this under control, I can handle this. And so we're like, yes. So we're like, okay, he's going to be our art lead. We found a few other, just real great, people. One of them was from LucasArts. One of them, Victor, was actually, Victor the Hungarian. He it was such a workhorse. He would just bust this stuff out. Anyway. So after, I'd say, like maybe the first month or so, we had a full team and we were ready to go. And the funny thing is, I think I'm missing some people because I know that we had a guy by the name of Pat Hook, who had come over with the Mumbo Jumbo group, and he was awesome. He was just like anything that needed doing, he was just the guy that would do it. Again, so many good people that just like came out of the woodwork to come together to make this game. So we were all kind of going forward, and the list of characters, I think at the end of the day we had something like 40 unique 3D character models that all needed to be animated with something like 20 or 30 different animations. and they all had to be balanced and all that stuff, game wise, and it was a ton of work to do, and it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just making the character. It was because it was myth, and you had all of like the all the characters could blow up and drop things and all that stuff. We had to model not just all their weapons, but all the pieces of all the different things and all that. So we also had to model all of the props, all the environments and everything else in the game, and all of like I think at the end of the day we had something like 20 levels or something like that. It was a lot. Um, and so all this stuff was being built. And it was just this like pipeline that we made, this really tight pipeline where we were just jamming things through. And the designers were busy, making all the maps, again in Myth 2. And they were constantly coming back to me and saying things like, "Okay, Scott, you have another siege level. It's like, what are we going to do to make this interesting? Or hey, these characters are just kind of like wandering around. It's like there's not really a whole lot to do, so we need a little bit more motivation." And so I would go back and make changes and such based on their recommendations. So
Mm-hmm.
it really at the end of the day ended up being a very collaborative effort, I think. So oh my goodness, there was a lot of like creative writing and stuff that I had to do. Not just like naming all of like the bazillions and bazillions of different units, but trying to come up with all of the lore that would kind of like connect everything together, and all of like when you click on a unit and actually see like some lines of text that kind of give you a background of like oh, what about these gold brutes make them different from regular goals, or oh, the Trow Iron Warrior, what's up with that thing, and just all
Mm-hmm.
of the flavor text and all that stuff. I was busy doing that and kind of like overseeing the production of everything and blah blah blah. So we were going, and we were going surprisingly fast. I'd say in the first 6 months, we flipped the switch and actually were using the 3D engine, and we were actually starting to see a lot of our stuff, really come to life in the game. Though there were still a lot of levels and things like that were just kind of like semi-painted landscape with no props or anything, because all of that was still being built, and we had a lot of like stand-in characters for things like Mercridia and stuff like that. So a lot of stuff was still coming together, but you could kind of play the game. So the
Mm-hmm.
first, kind of real big issue was just all right, we have this massive story, and the only way that these levels that we've constructed are going to make sense in some kind of cohesive fashion is if there are, interstitials that tell the story. And I wanted to do the same thing that like Myth 1 and Myth 2 did, where we have a nice little, hand-drawn picture and then like scrolling text on the side that
Mm-hmm.
kind of give you a setup for the levels. But even then, that wasn't quite enough because the story was so big, and it took a lot of like explaining. I wanted to have like cinematics and things like that, but the budget would not allow for that. So unfortunately, we had to like do a lot of these cinematics and things kind of by hand, where we took some hand-drawn pictures and kind of like just through my god, I think it was like After Effects or something like that, put them up with like some narration and such. And at the end of the day, they were so cheesy, and honestly I wanted to cut them so bad, but without them there was really no way to kind of like convey the larger story. So I kind of begrudgingly left them in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so sad that we couldn't like really make this a true like AAA epic. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, as long as we're telling the story and people understand what's going on, I guess we'll have to make this work. And I was like, okay, if the game is fun, the levels are fun to play, people will hopefully forgive, some of the cheesiness of like, how we present the story, and I'm like, multiplayer's got to be strong too, right? So anyway, that was
Mm-hmm.
kind of where I was going at. So we hired a group called, oh my gosh, I'm going to get the name wrong, but I think it was like Digital Pencil or New Pencil, that's it, thank you, out of San Francisco. And they were just doing hundreds and hundreds of like little like thumbnail sketches basically for the game. And they pretty much did all of the interstitial art. So we hired a narrator to basically do just basically all of the storylines and stuff. And unfortunately, me now, with the 20 plus years of experience I've had since then, I look back on all of the writing I did, for the in between all the levels and stuff, and my God, I needed an editor. It's very long. It's kind of rambling, and it's overly dramatic at times, and but I mean, I guess it gets the point across. But oh my goodness, it was long, and it's kind of like hard to to play the game now and just have like that 15 minutes or whatnot of just the narrator talking about, oh, and by the way, Canuck does this thing, and then this thing happens, and this, and it's like, you know what? I would so much rather be playing this than just listening to it, right? But stuff happens. And again, that we had such a shoestring budget. We're kind of surprised that anything really happened at the end of the day. That we even got the thing done is surprising to me. So anyway, getting back to it. All the pieces are coming together, but it turns out that gathering of developers, even though they had the money set aside and they've been paying us, they actually kind of forgot about our game. And so, because we'd call them up and we'd say, "Hey, we're the guys doing Myth 3," and we got a lot of "Who doing what?" Who are you guys again? And it was just kind of confusing, right? And so it got to a point where we're like, all right, marketing, let's start getting some of those magazine ads and such like that out there. And there was nothing. And by nothing, I mean there was nothing set up, there was nothing prepared, there was no marketing team, there was no anything. And so we're kind of looking at this going, well, wait a minute, who's going to know our game is going to even be out there without any sort of marketing? So we eventually got a phone call saying that, oh, hey, we got you this ad in, I don't even remember the name of the game magazine, but we got you a full page ad. And we're like, great, all right, who's going to be the marketing team that puts together? And they said, well, we don't really have one. Why don't your team put it together? So yeah, we ended up actually making our own ad, for the game, and writing our own copy and putting our own screenshots together and stuff like that. I mean, it was just kind of silly. And then we needed to put something up on the gathering website, and of course, since there was no marketing, we had to do it ourselves. So literally, the team was like, "Okay, guys, stop what you're doing. We need to go make this video that kind of shows that Myth 3 is going to come out." And I mean, again, typical shoestring kind of stuff. So we made, I think, a couple of videos. We made a couple of ads at the end of the day. And then I remember it was E3 time. And gathering developers at this point had their own lot outside of E3. I think the way the story went is that they were kicked out of E3 or something like that. So they decided that they were going to purchase the parking lot or something right across the street and set up RVs and such like that, and actually show off their games and such in this gathering of developers lot. So that was fun. We had our own RV, and we were there showing off Myth 3, and I remember we were there and we were showing it off, and no one knew we were there because there was, again, no marketing. So we would say, "Hey, we're Myth 3," and people would come in and say, "Myst! Oh, I loved Myst. That was such a fun point and click adventure game." We're like, "No. This is the number 3 of Bungie's Myth franchise." And they're like, "Huh? What? Oh, whatever." So we got a lot of people not understanding not just what we were, but what kind of game we were making. The few people we actually got in the RV and sat down and actually showed them how to play the game, they were like, "Wow, this is really cool." It looked pretty cutting edge for, again, 2000. With 3D characters and interesting lighting models and such like that, and our grass waved in the breeze and stuff. We were so proud of that. I think our high point was when Gabe and Tycho from Penny Arcade came by to take a look, and they were fairly surprised at what we could pull off in less than a year. We were pretty happy. But truly, at the end of the day, again, no marketing, no one really knew about us. But damn it, we were going to make the best damn game we could make, within a year on a shoestring budget. So we came back from gathering developers and the E3, and we were raring to go. We were jazzed, right? We were going to get this thing done. We were going to ship it. I think it was a December release or something like that. It was December 3rd or something, or maybe it was Thanksgiving. I can't remember. It was Thanksgiving. That's right. So as we're racing towards the end, we're getting close. We don't really have any play test, right? There's no like real formal play test or anything like that. So we end up pretty much play testing the game ourselves. And again, we're only like, I think at the end of the day, we're like a 10, 12-man crew, something like that. So we didn't really have a lot of play testing. We played against ourselves and such like that. But, we would get in these ruts where we were like, here's the way to, kind of like exploit the dwarfs and, just, murder everyone. And we're like, no, come on, we need to play like everyone else. And anyway, so we were, again, racing forward to towards the end, and so when the date arrived where we basically needed to ship the game, we had no choice. We had no extension. We had no anything else. We basically had to make sure that the Gold Master was done on time, sent to gathering developers, and that was it. We had no further anything. So we did our damnedest to make sure that it was as tight as possible and shipped it. And of course, about a week later, we found that, oh, damn, there were some pretty major bugs in the multiplayer version of the game. Well, so Ender Meggs and Joe Rydell, kind of like jumped on it to try to, go in and fix it. But there were some pretty deep problems, and it was taking a little bit of time. But unfortunately, I would say it was less than a month. It was probably about 3 weeks or so after we shipped. We get the word from the heads of Mumbo Jumbo that we're going to be closing the doors. That now that the money for Myth 3 has run out, we don't have any other money and no other games, in the pipe. So we basically have to shut down. And that was it. And then the team that had basically come together in a year to basically crunch and make this game, we were basically, kind of split up and just, went our own separate ways. And, it was really kind of heartbreaking because I think we gelled really well together. We went through this crucible of fire to actually, produce something that we were pretty proud of. But there was no more money, and we all kind of left. So the company that many of us had come from, Logicware, which actually just before Mumbo Jumbo had taken over, we had changed the name to Contraband Software. We decided that we were going to reform Contraband, so it was Contraband 2.0, and that was when Andrew Meggs and Joe, in their spare time, they decided that, we're going to do whatever we can to fix the Myth 3 multiplayer and, just kind of put it out there in patches. And they did that on their own. It was actually a hell of a Herculean effort. And I think it took them like a year or something like that. But really, at the end of the day, it really fixed Myth 3, quite a bit. Our initial kind of like reception and such like that from a lot of the critics was that, it's a pretty cool game, but man, the multiplayer's got a lot of bugs. But like I said, about I'd say maybe a year or so afterwards, it was pretty solid. But I actually neglected to mention one of the big things about shipping the game. So what? Since this the development happened in basically all through 2001. Unfortunately, one of the big events in 2001 was, of course, September 11th. And we, Gathering Developers was in New York at the time. And so I remember very, very distinctly talking to one of the producers on the morning of September 11th. And, all of us just kind of being in a daze because, he was saying that he was, basically trapped on one of the bridges getting into the city, and was just didn't know what was going on, and everything was just chaos. And the whole day was really just kind of crazy. And besides that, we knew we were shipping in November, and so we were like, well, we wonder how this was going to affect the sales of games and things like that. And it turned out it really did. When we were out there on the store shelves, no one, not just with lack of marketing, no one knew about us, but I think the whole feeling of at least we're we were in like the States and such, it's like no one was really interested in like, escapism and entertainment and such like that. Everyone was just kind of like still in shock, even like, a month or two after the whole thing. Yes, I think that kind of like initially affected our sales and such like that, because we went on the store shelves immediately to the bargain bin, we were all, kind of sad about it, but, we were all, kind of in shock as well from everything still. So, no one was doing good at that point, so we weren't really surprised. But yeah, like I said, everyone afterwards kind of like went their separate ways after Mubba Jubba closed their doors, I would say that the funny thing is, we all kind of kept in touch, everyone, and even years afterwards, we were still, not just in contact, but like, we, still sent emails back and forth to each other. I mean, as a matter of fact, Jay and myself, we got in contact again, like in 2006, a good 5 years later or something like that. We were both bitching about our jobs, and we were like, "Hey, man, you know what? We should really, we can totally do this better. We should totally form our own company and do this thing, and actually make the games that we want to make and that should be made." And we formed our own company, which is Whitemoon Dreams, and 14 years later, we're still in business somehow. Going forward. So yeah, it's kind of funny. Late 2000 is when I met Jay through Myth 3, and we're still making games together. So there's that.
It's really cool.
Yeah. So I mean, that's again the long story, but I'm sure I missed a lot of things out, and I'm sure I missed a lot of other people's names. I mean, there was Craig Matchett as another artist. Oh my gosh, there like I said, we were about a dozen people that all came together and made this thing happen. But like I said, I'm sure I'm missing some people. My memory ain't perfect, but yeah, man. So again, any questions you might have, shoot them by me.
I have several questions here. I do have your proposal documents from Take Two. So they're
oh my gosh, are you kidding me?
Yeah, I do have them. So, anyways, so it sounds like, I think it sounds like one of the biggest problems with this game was a mismatch between the budget and your original intent for the game. So how did that happen?
Well, again, because initially, when we got the ask of, hey, what would you do with a Myth 3? I did want to make it a worthy successor, right? I did want to tell the story. I wanted to kind of like create the story of like, all of the kind of like the lore that Myth 1 and Myth 2 built up. I wanted to, kind of like connect all of that and kind of like, really kind of like tell the story about how all of that actually happened. And so it became a fairly big story, and it was vast and grand. And also, I really wanted the contract. So, I made sure that, this was something that, if you read it, you're like, whoa, this sounded so epic. So when that got approved, I was like, yes, all right, excellent. Now we can actually make this real. And then, of course, when we got the budget, now, it's okay, well, they approved this giant epic story, but now they're giving us a budget for basically like a much, much, much smaller game. So how the hell do we reconcile this? And so I did try my best. Believe it or not, a lot of that, got cut down. A lot of, kind of like certain side things and such like that, mostly cinematics and things like that, got trimmed down to try to make the budget. And also, truthfully, we should have had more people on the team. It really would have made our lives a lot easier. But because the budget was so, shallow, we just, we couldn't. We had to really just, make our all out of the people that, we could get. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. That kind of discrepancy between, hey, we're all here to make a AAA game, but we have the budget for maybe a, C- game.
Yeah.
But again, I at the end of the day, I'm still pretty proud of what we put out. I mean, it's definitely not perfect. It's definitely got its flaws and such, but for what we had to work with, I am pretty proud.
Yeah, I got kind of the impression that Take Two was interested in a cash grab. You know what I mean?
Well,
And I can
I don't actually think it was a cash grab so much. I honestly believe that they just had this portfolio of IPs, and they're like, okay, we spent money for this IP. What could we do with it, right? And
sure,
so then
sure.
they just kind of threw it out there, and they said, hey, is there anyone that wants to do something with this, Myth IP? And I think we were like Logic or Contraband at the time. We were like one in three different companies that were interested in doing something with it, and we just happened to get it. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't think Take Two was greedy or anything. It was more of just
Okay.
we got it, let's do something with it.
Yeah, I mean, I might partially think that too because I play NBA 2K sometimes on my
Yeah.
PS4. If you know about that.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So you probably sounds like you probably knew the Bungie Myth team pretty well then, huh?
Well,
Like you talked to them a bit.
the funny thing is, I only actually ever met them one time.
Mm-hmm.
And just to tell a little personal story. So the I wish I could remember his name, but the designer of Myth One, very very learned dude, very kind of like college taught kind of guy. When I went when a few of us from Launchware went over to Bungie in Chicago, he pulled me aside and he basically said, "Okay, so you're going to be doing the design for this expansion." And he basically was like, "Hey, have you ever read the Gallic Wars by Caesar?" And me being at the time, I mean, I know games, I know game design. Sure, I've read some books, and I know a little bit about a little things. But I was not, I never went to college. Not deep in the literature and such like that. So all I could do is kind of blink and say, well, I know a little bit about it, but I've never read it. And he kind of like says, okay, well, do you know about the Tuatha De Danann? Do you know about all these other, just basically rattled off all of these books and and stuff. And I was just kind of like blinking at him, and I'm like, well, I play a lot of D&D. And he is just kind of like, oh my god, you're the designer of this thing. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I just I don't. Anyway, we were very much on different levels, where I was thinking more of like, hey, we're making a game, and he's thinking more of the no, we're basically trying to retell a modern epic story, right? Of like an ancient story of heroes and things like that. He was on a totally different mindset than me.
Yeah.
And mind you, I had back in 94, 95 and such like that. I was the lead designer of the original Fallout. So as
Sure.
far as like stories and giant epic world building stuff, I was very familiar with that kind of stuff. But this was one of the first times, again, this was like oh my god, I think it was like 96, 97, something like that when this happened. I kind of was like, I felt really bad coming out of that, because I'm like, gosh, I thought I knew stuff about stuff, but I guess I really don't, and there's a whole lot more for me to learn. So that kind of actually pushed me when Myth did come out, to kind of like say, all right, well, what are they on about, and really getting into the story and the lore and going, wow, you know what, there really is a lot here, yeah, this is very deep, and it's very different. And so that actually kind of like prompted me to go and learn a little bit more about well, I mean, again, the Gallic Wars, and the history of just Irish folklore, and and like the Picts and the Celts, and it's the whole thing basically, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
the very very interesting and very different kind of storytelling that is typically done in in kind of like the folklore that is just not really a part of modern storytelling.
Sure.
It's anyway, I thought it was at the end of the day, it was very unique, very, kind of like refreshing. And I personally think I learned a lot just from, that experience. And again, that was another reason for me, like when we had the chance to basically work on a Myth 3, I was like, oh yeah, let me show you all the stuff that I learned and how, now that I understand this, how we can take it and expand it and, try to, make it, again, continue the story.
Yeah, sure. I'm guessing you're talking about Jason Jones.
I'm going to say yes, though I honestly don't know.
He's like the CEO or Bungie, because it's him and I don't know if I can remember how to pronounce his last name. Alex Soprano.
Yeah, it wasn't Alex. Yeah, Alex was more on the biz dev side of things.
Yeah, Jason was like his developer, and he was the one that like made Pathways into Darkness and Marathon
and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, honestly, this was such a long time ago. I barely remember. I
understand. It's fine. It's fine. You don't need to explain. So here's the interesting thing. So in the Myth like forums and stuff, like we know about this pizza box that Bungie had some of their story written on the back. Do you know anything about that?
So there was actually a this like. It was kind of weird by Bungie fans. It's this like strangely exalted thing, which was this document that basically like talked about what the kind of like the ideas behind Myth were, right? And Myth as a game, right? And it was a lot of stuff like we don't want the typical tropes of like the children that save the world and all this stuff. They wanted more of this like of a dark folklore kind of idea, very grim, very like kind of like end of the world, but like telling it in these like heroic, epic cycles, and things like that. But it was kind of funny. The listening to some of the Bungie fans talk about it, some of them had said, "Oh, I have read this thing," and it was like again this like strange, like exalted document, and at the end of the day, I realized that I, in fact, had read this. This is one of the notes that was sent over as like a text document or something like that way early on. And I think I had even read it when we were working on the Myth 1 expansion, of all things. And it was only like, maybe like 50 lines long. And it basically just said, here are the good things, here are the bad things, right? Here's the stuff we want to do. This stuff kicks ass, and the bad stuff is just like, we want to avoid this because this sucks. And that was it. That was all. That was all it was. And I was just kind of like scratching my head, going like, wow, the fans, they really are, kind of like, turning, these very small things into like these holy relics, because they just love the story, the game, so much. But I actually, speaking of like the Myth fans and such like that, I remember when we first announced Myth 3, we had a we were kind of, it was almost like a lecture type announcement, right? Where we got up on stage and we invited all of the people that were in the Myth community and such like that. This was my God, I want to say it was at GDC or something like that. I could be wrong, but we basically said, hey, we're doing a Myth 3, and the real big thing is that everyone was kind of like, in a way, hating on us a little bit because we weren't Bungie, right? How could we possibly do this because we weren't Bungie? And I was like, fair enough and all that. And we said, hey, we'll field any questions that you guys have. And they were a little bit. I don't know. It was kind of like a combination of excited and annoyed that we were trying to do a prequel. That we would dare take some of this like cherished history and try to like expand upon it or add it or whatnot. And the biggest fear was that we were going to make something stupid or make something inconsistent or whatnot. And one of the things that someone had brought up that again, this is in a way, this is kind of like really like deep Myth lore. They had said that, well, wait a minute, if this is a prequel, then you guys can't have Soulless in your game. The evil unit, the Soulless, the floating skeletal torsos that throw the javelins. Because it said in some obscure piece of lore that Ravana was the first of the fallen lords to create the Soulless, and they were kind of like hers, I guess, or something like that. And so they brought that up during the talk, and I said, and apparently this pissed off a bunch of people, and I didn't quite realize it. But I said, the very first thing is that we have to have Soulless in our game. It's not going to be a Myth game without Soulless as, a unit that you can either go up against or use. We have to have Soulless. That's number one. Number two, I said, well, we are actually, bringing Ravana back, but in a state before she was a fallen lord, right? So I'm like, okay, well, maybe she gained that lore from something else, and so Soulless existed before her, but she was the one that perfected it for Myth 1 and Myth 2. And I said, it might be a tiny bit of a change, but it's not too much of a stretch. But apparently that caused a pretty big uproar of the, how dare he, change the lore of Myth, and, this is established stuff, and, I thought it was a small little thing, but apparently it caused a bit of a holy war. And a lot of people were already upset with me before Myth 3 even came out. So, there was that.
Well, if it makes you better, from reading like a lot of forums and stuff and studying the game a lot, there's a lot of things that I have seen that people have taken as story and stuff, which if you actually dig into the game is contradictory to the lore in the game. And so don't take it too seriously. That's just kind of the way the Myth fans have been, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I also found that a lot of what the fans were kind of like, on about were things that the community itself created that honestly, I was kind of unaware of, because the story for Myth 3 had already been kind of like created while some of this was still kind of like going on. So I mean, it is what it is. It is difficult to make sequels to things where you already have an established fan base that are really, really rabid. Again with Fallout and such like that, right? With Fallout 2, I know a lot of people loved it, but there were still some rabid fans that were hating on it. And even then, like when you look at Fallout 3 and stuff like that. So one of the things I get asked a whole lot when people find out that I had anything to do with the original Fallout was, "Hey, what do you think Bethesda did to your game?" And I'm like, my honest opinion is I think they did fine. I actually loved Fallout 3. I mean, I didn't really love the story, don't get me wrong, but like the gameplay and everything was great. Fallout 4, hey, high five, guys. You did great. But again, what a lot of people are really asking me is, tell me why you hate it, what they did wrong.
I know.
But no, I actually liked it. I thought they did good.
So, yeah, I liked Fallout 3, but they kept making like the same game over and over, so I started to think Bethesda games are kind of boring in my opinion, but that's besides the point. It was like fun when I first started playing them, but then they do the same thing over and over, and the story's not that interesting. So
yeah,
anyways.
I mean, honestly, the only thing I didn't like about Fallout 3 was just like, mostly like the primary quest. All the side quests and things were really cool, but that primary quest, and especially that end, and that really like terrible, like, kind of like pseudo decision that you get to make at the end, I thought that was really bad. I mean, there's so many different ways you could have handled that. And when I actually reached it in the game, I was just like, really? All of the rest of this game is so stellar good, but now you give me this, right? Do I sacrifice myself, or do I let someone I'm just like, come on, please. Anyway, that's besides the point. We're talking about Myth 3.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of fans now, they don't consider Myth 3 canon. It's kind of like what you're saying, like they're very like particular, you know what I mean, about
yeah,
it.
And
So,
the thing is I remember at one particular point, I was talking to a couple of people that were really, really into the Myth series, and they didn't consider Myth 3 canon, and I asked them why. What is it about Myth 3 that isn't canon? I'm like, well, basically what I was trying to get at is, what did I get wrong, right? What in
Yeah.
the story did I screw up? What are the things you didn't like? And it just turns out, from what it seems like, is because it didn't come from Bungie, it couldn't possibly be canon. So
Oh,
that
I
was,
agree with that.
yeah.
I think there is one thing about your story that is a lot different than the Myth Bungie games, and that is that the Myth Bungie games had a lot of stuff where it's kind of like open to interpretation. You can kind of
Oh yeah.
decide. You can kind of decide what you wanted to be true and what not. And I think Bungie did that on purpose because they're trying to like make it mysterious and not whatnot. And I think your game is there's ways is like that, but not nearly to the extent that Bungie was. Like you kind of like solved a lot of the mysteries they had and stuff like that. And I think a lot of people were upset about that because like it's like, well, we had all these good theories and whatnot, and now Scott comes in and he decides this is what it was. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just just as a peek behind the curtain, that was actually one of the things I set up, or I set off to try to do for Myth 3. I wanted to
Hmm.
try to connect all of that, loose stuff, and I didn't want to do it, perfectly, and I actually wanted to add some things, to a little bit more of like, oh, a little bit more of the deeper history of the world and such like that. But it is true that I really did want to like the whole concept of like Connacht and all that stuff, right? It's like who was he, what did he do, and all I
Yeah.
had to really work with is a couple of snippets of lore and that one statue that you find in like the ruins of Langrefan in like a Myth 1, or was it 2? No, I'm pretty sure it was 1. And it all was like this bald-headed dude with an axe, and I'm like, okay, so that's Connacht, and it's like, how does he become that? And that was just some of the things threw in there, but like the whole idea of like we knew that at the beginning that the Mercuridia were a thing, and that they were basically like kind of oppressing humanity, like they were had humanity at the brink because they were just like near impossible to kill. And I'm like, well, wouldn't it be cool if like Connacht started from like one of these like tribes off on the fringe, and he learned how to kill Mercuridia. That was like his thing, right? He was the slayer of these
Hmm.
beasts that come out in the night and destroy villages. And then when the emperor of Longrefan, basically says, "Hey, we need someone like you to help us because the leveler has shown up." Then it's like, oh well, there's like there's the beginning of the story, and then you can have like your champions come together, and all that stuff. And also I wanted to tell the story of like the smiths of Mirathenmain. It's like
Hmm.
how in the hell are there all these spiders inside of the Tane, right? That was something that always
Hmm.
I was scratching my head on, going, why? And so the whole idea of like this, like them through their magics, unleashing this basically like the spider god, and
Hmm.
how did they get rid of it? Well, they imprisoned it in the Tane, which is why there's all these giant spiders running around in there. Anyway, just all these like little snippets of things. I just wanted to kind of like combine them to make sense of them, instead of
Yeah.
just having all these like kind of like disparate like, what is that and why is that, instead of just saying, oh, I guess it is because it is. It's like, no, this is the one thing that will give you the pretty definitive reasons why. So yeah, that was
No.
my goal.
No, I can see why you do that because like any Myth fan, you play the game and you start digging in the story and you want to like solve all the mysteries. So you were basically like a story writer who had the opportunity to answer those. So it was just
Yeah,
natural for you to want to solve those. So I think that makes a lot of
exactly.
sense.
Like, why was
Yeah.
Mordred called the deceiver, right? It's like, that needed to be put in there somehow, right? It's like, why, and why would his friends call him the deceiver, and why in like Myth 1, when it talks about like how the fallen lords get interact with
Yeah.
each other, why they all hate him, and stuff like that, right? And it's like all these other the characters, and like a setup for like why are they 1,000 years later acting the way they are. Anyway, just again, all these little things I wanted to touch on, and even though I didn't like definitively say here is exactly why on every little thing, I did put up where there was a lot of like kind of like I don't know kind of like almost like this ephemeral, intangible kind of like mist. Linking the lore between Myth One and Myth Two, I kind of wanted to make it a little bit more brick and mortar. Like here is the answer. But yeah, I think that you're right. That probably did a lot of the fans that had their own ideas of what really happened in the past. I think that may have made some of them angry.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can't make everyone happy. I'm sure there's lots of like hardcore fans that weren't happy about it, and a lot of casual fans that loved it. It's you can't make everyone happy. And I mean, I think you did fine. Maybe there's some lessons learned, but oh well. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
So there was a group I want to talk to you about real quick who tried to go to Take-Two to like purchase it. I think Night Dive Studios, they wanted to remaster it. Did you ever hear about that?
You know what? I did not. The only interesting thing that happened, this was like right near the end of development of Myth 3. We had a group that came by and said that they wanted to petition Take-Two to do a Myth 4, and they were asking us, like what would we do with a Myth 4? And that was a real interesting conversation, and that they had like a big online petition and stuff like that. But I don't think that went anywhere, to be honest.
I wasn't really me personally. I know what you're talking about. I wasn't a fan of it because they were trying to make Myth 4 and they didn't have the rights to it.
Yeah, it was something like that.
So that's why I was like, well, basically you're making a plugin, but it's an ambitious plugin, right? But you're calling it Myth 4 when you don't have the right. I thought that was kind of shady in my opinion, but But anyways, I'm not going to get into that because I don't want to throw any more shade on anyone. You know what I mean? So anyways, let's see. Do I have anything else? You probably got to go pretty soon, huh?
Let's see. Well, I mean, I honestly, if you wanted to squeeze out another 20 minutes, I could probably give it to you.
All right. Well, I think you answered most of my questions.
Well, cool. Yeah, I know it's a big story dump, but that's kind of the way I work.
So your story writing style.
Well, yeah, what is it? A lot of people say it's information dense. Yes, that's the description.
So if you remember, there's this guy. He wanted me to tell you. This guy named Forrest. He had like a big fan website and stuff. And so he said he treated you kind of bad when he was a kid back then. So he was telling me to tell you he was sorry for that. So if that rings bells, he had like a big long theory he said about the cycle, and he said he was sad about it because he had like a huge long thing where he's trying to convince people it was 1,000-year cycle and all that. So.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, everyone. I remember that there was a lot of, well, maybe not a lot, but there were some people on a lot of the myth forums that, again, had their holy wars on the story, and honestly, at the end of the day, I think it's always good to be passionate about something, right? It's sometimes hard to become inclusive when there's something that might bump up against the passion that you have, the way you want it to be. It's everyone. Of course, at the end of the day, it's like all everyone likes myth, likes the story, likes the franchise, and likes to be a part of it. It's just sometimes when we fight over the little things, all we're really doing is just showing how passionate we really are. So as a game designer, it's like that there's always going to be people that either love your game or hate your game. Actually, just as a quick aside, when I was at Sony, this was after the Myth franchise, but before we formed Whitemoon Dreams. I was working on this game called it was a Neopets game for the PlayStation 2 called of all things The Darkest Fairy. And it's really funny. The name is horrible. Don't get me wrong. The name is absolutely terrible. But what I planned on doing with that game is I really wanted to make a kind of like Legend of Zelda type game, but in this Neopets world. It was very action adventure-y, lots of like, quests and huge epic sprawling story, which I'm wont to make. Some people, they thought it was like the best game ever, and I had these small kids basically saying, "Oh my gosh, this is great! I love the characters, I love everything about it. This is amazing." But then I had other kids that were basically like, "Where are the guns? This isn't a first-person shooter. Why can't I kill things?" And stuff like that. I'm just like, wow, yeah, you just can't please everyone, and there's always going to be people that bring their own stuff into their tastes. The best you can really hope for is just make something that you are personally proud of, and if other people can have some fun and enjoyment out of it, then guess what? You've done your job.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's what mods are for. Mods are for those kinds of people. That's kind of the bad thing about all the big games today, is it's harder to make for people to have these good mods. So
yeah, well, a lot of the games today, right? They're put out so I mean, I wouldn't say tight budgets, but the schedules and things like that. With like the sheer amount of work that they need to do, and just the orchestration of getting everything done at the right time. These giant AAA games, they're just not made to have mods. It's like that's kind of like an afterthought, because it's like why would we take the extra time to have all of this stuff that other people could come in and essentially screw with our game, and put in the extra time and money to allow people to do that, as opposed to just making an expansion pack ourselves that we can approve the content and make sure that it's up to our standards, and and put that out and actually make money off of it, as opposed to just having a community build stuff for ostensibly free. It's all just modern ways of thinking, and truthfully, it's like the games industry is even though we're the kind of budgets and things that some games have, you look at and you're like, oh my god, 30 million to do this, holy crap. Yeah, but that's a very small number of games. Most games are doing it for again, like Myth 3 on a shoestring, and any dollar that they can make, they kind of need it, because it's just it's a tough industry out there, right? It's like out of 1,000 games made, maybe 10 of them actually do well, and that's those are some rough numbers. And unlike the like the movie industry and stuff like that, games just don't have a lot of outlets, right? It's like for the movie industry, you have the initial theatrical release, and then you have like pay-per-view, and then it goes to all the cable channels, and then blah 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 blah. Lots of ways to make money off of your movie. That just ain't the way for games, right? You basically have like the initial release, and that's it, and then it just it either sits on a shelf, or it goes to like GameStop, where they just resell it. But no one else makes any money off of that. Only GameStop does, right? So or like GameFly, and someone rents your game, but you don't make any money off of that game rental. So it's a pretty rough industry.
No, I agree with you. I don't like the way modern games are made, because I miss the old style where you would make a game, you knew exactly what the story was. It's pretty straightforward, and you just play through the game. It might take you 10 15 hours, and then you're done with it. If you want to keep playing, you can play multiplayer, or maybe download some plugins or whatever, you know what I mean? But if you don't want to play it, you can just move on to the next game. So I kind of miss that, because I really don't. I feel like they have all these open world games because people want to get the budget for what they pay for. But the problem is, they get this game that it gets boring really quick, and the story isn't nearly as in depth. Yeah, so I was like, I miss the way that old games were made. I think we've gone backwards, personally, in my opinion. But
Well, again, it's really interesting when you factor in, like mass market and such like that, right? It's like
Yeah,
you can lament the same thing about like motion pictures and such as well. Like the difference between a Hollywood blockbuster and say like a small indie film, right? You can take a lot more chances with a small indie film and do something very interesting and very creative, but it's not going to make the kind of money that a blockbuster that's just made
for
for,
sure.
I hate to say it, like lowest common denominator and chew your popcorn kind of audience, right?
Oh yeah,
It's the difference between something like a movie like Knives Out, which I loved, and a movie like say like one of the Transformers movies, right? It's like one of them is made for a cerebral audience that is actually like paying attention, and yeah, it's not going to make a whole ton of money, but it's a good movie. And the other one is not a very good movie, but it's got lots of explosions and lots of things that, even though you're not maybe paying attention to it, you can still tune in every 5 minutes and go, "Ooh, hey, something's happening!" And while you're eating your popcorn and hugging your date, right? So, you know, I
yeah,
guess much like video games, right? You can have different styles of games, just
for
to
sure.
elicit different emotions, different moods, and that really satisfy different needs. So yeah, it's a little bit for everyone.
Yeah, I get it. There, people get excited about these open world games because they, then they go buy them. I don't know. Like that's what kids are interested in, right? That's what you gotta market to. You gotta market to all the people that will go and buy them.
Well, remember, kids don't have any money. You have to
That's
you have to
true.
market to their parents,
That's
so
true.
that yeah, or like the what is it, young 20-year-olds that actually have gotten their first job and are in their college dorm, and they're like, oh hey, let's buy the next whatever. But kids don't have any damn money, which is why Nintendo has all of the like a lot of problems when it comes to getting people to actually like buy their games. The kids aren't buying it. The kids are the ones that are screaming, "Mom,
Sure,
mom, mom,
sure,
buy the game for me!" But
sure.
it's still the parent that has to do it, right? The kid doesn't have the ability to actually go and spend money because they have no damn money. So Nintendo has to thread this needle where they're like making sure that the parents are still down with everything that the kids want as well. And but anyway, Nintendo's magic. They can do it. They're pretty amazing. Anyway, I think we've probably gotten off the subject of Myth 3 a little,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah,
So
man. It was at the end of the day, I would say that Myth 3 was a very interesting experience. That we had a team that came together in less than a year to put that entire game together in less than a year it's kind of astounding. I mean, even looking back now, I'm like, damn, how did we do it? Um, and yes, I wish I had known a little bit more about not just writing and game design at that time. But still, I can look back at what I did and go, that wasn't so terrible. It was okay. And some of it's funny. I actually had forgotten some of the links that I had made in like the story to try to flesh out some of the ambiguity of Myth 1 and Myth 2. And I remember going through like a wiki page or something like that and going, "Oh, hey, I remember doing that. Yeah, that was almost clever. Hey, then I'm like, hey, past self, pat on the back, right?" Um,
yeah, yeah.
but
I think you did a lot of stuff well. You should be proud of what you did.
well, thank you.
Yeah.
But again, for a number 3 in the franchise, I think it still holds up pretty well, even though it may not be considered canon.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you. I think you did a lot good job with what you had. The odds were against you. I do think though, if you had a bigger budget, maybe like developed it 6 more months, take out a lot of the stuff that's not balanced well and the glitches and stuff like that, it would have hit this. It definitely would have had a much better reception, in my
Yeah,
opinion. But
man. I mean, truthfully, at the end of the day, I think we needed about 6 more months and probably about $300,000 more, and I think we could have
yeah,
done it. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, we that entire game. I'm trying to remember, and I might get the number right, but I think that entire game was done with a budget under 1.2 million.
Yeah. That's crazy. So I don't know if you peeked at my YouTube channel. So I went through Myth 1 and 2. I kind of have like a in-depth playthrough, right, where I talk all about the lore, talk all about like Easter eggs, some references they made that I found, my opinion on what some things were. You know what I mean? So I went really in depth, and now so I started in Myth 3. I made your like kind of like an intro video, so I might put this interview kind of like after it because that's perfect after I just talked about like the intro to the game, and then I say some of the things that I think like you might not have got right in the story, but whatever, not a big deal, So
well, I'm sure it's not perfect, and yeah, there might be some things I did in fact get wrong, but damn it if I didn't try.
I think the number one biggest thing I think you got wrong was the ogres, because in the Tales from Myth comic, kind of looks like ogres are like those like giant people or whatever. I don't know. Maybe I'll send you an image or something. I'll show you. I'll show you what I mean.
Absolutely. Because to be honest, I don't think I was aware of that at all.
Yeah, because there's actually an image of them in that Bungie comic.
So, oh my goodness. Okay.
And I also knew you used GURPS a lot, and it was very obvious because at the end of the game, the epilogue, you have Trabis Mirror, and it's actually Tramis Mirror with an M and not a B. And so, and it's spelled like that in the Myth Bungie games, but GURPS spelled it wrong. And so I could tell you could copied the misspelling from GURPS. So I was like, it's painfully obvious that you used it.
No, I mean, just so you know, I had that GURPS myth on my desk. That I was constantly referring to, and I had all of the text from Myth 1 and Myth 2, all of like the interstitial text, all of the flavor text for all the characters and all that stuff, even all the names that they use for all of those characters. I had all of that printed out and in a 3-ring binder that I would constantly be referencing.
Yeah, it like takes meticulous studying in order to get this story right.
Yep.
It really does. And so like it takes me a while to make all the videos I had. So I'd imagine that, I was going through some of the same things you were back in the day.
I'm sure we hit the same things and probably even had the same questions, like what the heck were they talking about with this? And I mean, and there were some, like, I remember that there was a couple of like weird inconsistencies with their own lore, and I was like, well, I guess I should choose one or the other, or try to figure out a way to make them both kind of true. And yeah.
Oh, let me. Yeah, here's some pictures. I'll show you in 1 second. I'm snipping it. I'm gonna message it to you just because I wanna see what you think.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out why what we decided on with the ogres. I mean, like why we made them like kind of like piggy like.
I think you're probably going off. I'm gonna guess you were going off of the malls because they're kind of from the same area.
Oh, that's right. That's exactly what it was. We actually. The malls. Oh yes. Okay.
So so I don't blame you for getting it wrong. So and it's not necessarily definitive that you had it wrong, but
wow.
Because it's talking about them, defeating killing, the ogres, Yep. So and you can see them all. They're all like big, tall people, which makes sense because that's usually what you think of.
Thrall, to be honest. Oh wait, no, there's Trow there, and what? I've seen this image before, and I think this was one of the things that we we're getting our Trow Iron Warriors. I think.
Oh yeah.
I'm pretty sure that the idea of like Trow, but like in like full on like giant slabs of iron armor and such like that, right? I'm pretty sure this is where we got it from.
Yeah. Well. Anyways, it's not like painfully obvious that those are ogres, but you know what I mean? If you really pay attention to the comic, you're like, oh yeah, that's what they were tending to be, ogres. But anyways, I don't blame you for it. I just thought it was interesting. I wanted to see what you thought.
Crazy. Yeah, man. I mean, again, it's it's a lot of stuff. It's a surprisingly large amount of just lore and such like that. That's just jam packed in Myth 1 and Myth 2. I mean, it's there's a lot of stuff there, and a lot of it is just very nuanced and, I hate to say it, scattered. So yeah, there is most likely a couple of things that I didn't quite get right, or wasn't perfect with existing stuff. But again, man,
I'm not calling you out. I'm not calling you out, man. Don't feel bad.
It's all good, dude.
So, but you got any games that you're making that you think Myth fans would like? Or I guess you can't tell me what games you're making, but
Well, I mean, I could.
Maybe tell me later. We'll keep. I might message you some questions on Discord if you're cool with that.
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
so,
you can tell me about it when it's you're ready to reveal stuff, all right? Whatever.
I gotcha. Well,
if you got
the one thing I can say is we're at Whitemoon. We're working on several different projects at the moment, but we have one original IP project that we really want to begin, and our plans are to begin it soon. But of course, we're like everything, it all comes down to finances and such like that. So we're just making sure that we can do this correctly. But this would essentially be our first real triple A title.
And
our
awesome.
own unique IP AAA title. And let me just say that it does have some kind of characteristics of the Myth franchise. Let me just throw that out there.
Oh, that sounds exciting, man. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, no,
I'll try to keep visiting your website.
I'll definitely tell you about it on the QT. How about that?
Oh yeah. Maybe I can give you some input. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sure I'll find some interesting stuff when I'm going through Myth 3, and you're welcome to, check out my or spread my YouTube channel to anyone who you think might be interested.
Cool, man. All right.
It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed talking to you. So
yeah, dude. Seriously, like anytime.
Anytime in your busy
talk.
schedule, right? Yeah. You had no problems, talking for 40 minutes straight.
Yeah, man.
It's a good quality for a writer, I suppose. You got to be able to spew things out, right?
Well, yeah. I mean,
we can't all do that.
I get a lot of speaking engagements for a lot of conventions and things like that. So it's just when they say go, I just blather for hours at a time.
Oh,
so
yeah, sure.
Oh goodness. Right. Anyway, dude. Yeah, man. Great talking to you. I will actually check out your YouTube channel and just see if there's a couple of people that see if I can't get a hold of some of the older team members and see if maybe they'd be interested in reliving some of the past.
Oh yeah, it's I wouldn't say I'm great at making videos, but I learned a lot about the games. For example, one thing I get really excited about is that that statue in Homecoming. You know which one I'm talking about? Is this guy holding a book or whatever, and he kind of looks like he might be an avatar or something?
Okay, yeah.
You remember with the church?
Yeah.
Okay, so that statue is. They used to say in the forums, if you go there, that they thought it's Connacht, but I think the most likely person it is Forgal. And they talk about Forgal in the comic and Tyro's bestiary.
Whoa.
And they talk about him being from Connacht. I mean, not from Connacht, from Covenant. From Covenant, which is where that mission is located.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So he would not be a contemporary of Connacht. He would basically be someone that had come after. So
that book he's holding isn't actually the Tane is probably Forgal's bestiary. Which I thought was really interesting. It's a theory. There's no proof of it, but it seems like the most likely thing. You know what I mean? So I found a lot of cool stuff like that. I don't know if that's what Bungie was thinking when they made it or not, but you know what I mean. It's interesting stuff.
So let me tell you a real quick story, and you may already know this, but actually I'm gonna have to go here soon. But real quick, right? So one of the games I had the privilege to work on was called Shadow of the Colossus.
Oh, that game is awesome. I love that
It's
game.
I mean, personally, one of my most favorite games ever. And when I say work on it,
Sure.
all I really did was I had a chance to basically play it in an early state, give a whole bunch of feedback, and then it turns out a lot of that feedback actually got put into the game. So
Oh yeah.
whether or not they actually took it from me, I don't know. But I was, like I said, I was lucky enough to work on it. A lot of people, when they played that game, they of course fell in love with it. But there was one particular area of the game where there was this door, and everyone tried to get past this door, but couldn't. And there was all this like, well, what do we have to do? Maybe if you collect 100 of these, or maybe if you get to this place, or maybe if you do this, that, or the other thing. And it took years for people, because everyone thought that there must be something behind this door, and it took somebody basically going through and basically hacking the game to basically prove that really there is nothing behind the door. But in the
I think I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about.
In the remastered version of Shadow of the Colossus, they actually put something behind that door because the fans wanted it so much. So even though it wasn't necessarily a part of the original game, it kind of took on a life of its own and became something. And then when it was remastered, they said, well, we obviously have to do something with it. And even though it was just like a staircase leading down with like a sword or something like that, it was enough to basically validate all of these long years of these people speculating and how do we get in and all that stuff, right? So it's kind of, I think, the same thing with Myth, right? Like if Myth were to somehow be revised or whatnot, I mean, I think there's a lot of things like that, like you just mentioned with the statue, right? That should in fact be changed to be canon, right? Because it validates a lot of like what the fans want. And I think when you have something that exists kind of like outside of development and everything else, and something that takes on a life of its own, you have to respect what the fans want, right? You don't want to pull I hate to say it, like a Star Wars, right? We were like, screw the fans, we're resetting everything, and all of those books and novels and comics, those don't exist anymore. It's like, that's basically just giving you a giant middle finger to everyone that invested in your IP, right? It's like there comes a time where your game, your IP takes on a life of its own and becomes bigger than what you even thought, right? And I think Myth is something like that too, right? Where we could get to a point where if it ever again something else comes of it, we could all, in fact, all the fans and all the people that contributed to it, could just help shape the future of it. So I think that's a possibility, and it's something that if again, whoever might be looking at a Myth 4 or whether it be the fans themselves or another company, I think that's something that they should consider. All of the lore and all of the hopes and dreams that the fans have put into this.
Yeah. Fortunately, I don't think there's a very big market. I would like to see a remaster, but I think it's going to be hard to sell someone to make it. So if you So before I let you go, I do want to, if you have any like homemade videos or development stuff that you find lying around that you think people might be interested in, I would be interested to get that. For example, like I had that like Life's Little Annoyances video, and I put that on I tacked that on the end of my first video. I don't know if you remember that.
Now, mind you, this was almost 20 years ago, man.
I know. It's hard to find stuff, right?
Good Lord. I mean, it's hard to remember stuff. Oh my God.
I know. That's why it's so cool when you do find stuff like that, like videos of the people and stuff. Like, it's so cool because it's like all there is. There's only like, you know what I mean?
Jeez. Well, if I ever stumble across anything, you will be the first to know.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, you enjoy the rest of your day, Scott.
Man. And
it's a lot of fun talking to you.
Well, thank you. And if you do have, any questions, or if you just want to keep in touch, just hit me up, man.
Oh yeah, I'd love to, man. I actually